The letter was 5 years late, but the moment Adrian Cross saw the handwriting, the most feared man in Chicago stopped breathing. He had spent 5 years convincing himself that the woman who once meant everything to him had betrayed him, abandoned him, and disappeared without looking back. He had buried her memory beneath money, power, violence, and a reputation that made grown men tremble. But that morning, an old postal worker placed a weather-stained envelope on his desk, and Adrian recognized the handwriting before he even read the name. His hands, which had never shaken while facing armed enemies, began to tremble. Because the letter was from Rebecca. If you believe people deserve kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes love can survive even the hardest circumstances, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. 5 years earlier, Adrian had been a different kind of dangerous man. He was already the head of the Cross organization, a powerful criminal empire that stretched across several cities in the United States, but there had been one person who could make him forget everything he was supposed to be. Her name was Rebecca Hale. She worked at a small community library in Chicago, lived in a modest apartment above a bakery, and had a habit of carrying a paper cup of coffee everywhere she went. She knew Adrian was involved in dangerous business, though she never asked for details. What she loved was the quiet man he became when he was with her. Around Rebecca, Adrian could sit by a window and watch the rain without thinking about enemies, money, or revenge. She believed there was still a good man buried beneath all the darkness. But Adrian's world never allowed good things to remain untouched for long. One winter evening, Adrian discovered that one of his closest associates had been secretly working with a rival organization. The betrayal threatened everything he had built. At the same time, someone began following Rebecca. Cars appeared outside her library. Strange men watched her apartment. Anonymous warnings arrived at her workplace. Adrian wanted to protect her, but Rebecca saw something in his eyes that frightened her. She realized that the people around Adrian would always be targets because of him. Then one night, Adrian came home and found Rebecca gone. There was no explanation, no argument, and no goodbye. Her apartment was empty except for a few books, a broken coffee cup, and a small photograph of the two of them. Adrian searched everywhere. He sent people across Chicago and beyond. He checked airports, train stations, hospitals, and hotels. Nothing. Rebecca had disappeared as if she had never existed. For months, Adrian waited for her to return. Then anger replaced hope. He convinced himself that she had chosen to leave. He told himself that she had become afraid of him and decided that another life was better. Eventually, he stopped searching. The gentle part of him disappeared with her. 5 years passed. Adrian became colder, richer, and more feared. He moved into a massive estate outside Chicago, surrounded by security cameras, iron gates, and men who would have taken a bullet for him. Yet every night, when the house became silent, Adrian still remembered Rebecca sitting beside the fireplace, reading a book while rain tapped against the windows. He never admitted that he missed her. Then the letter arrived. The envelope was yellowed with age. The corner was torn, and a faded postal stamp showed that it had been mailed 5 years earlier. Somehow, it had been lost in a sorting facility and recently discovered inside an old damaged mail container during an archive transfer. The postal worker had recognized Adrian's name and personally delivered it because the address was still valid. Adrian stared at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Rebecca's handwriting covered the page. She began by saying that if Adrian was reading the letter, then something had gone terribly wrong with her plan. Adrian's heart tightened. Rebecca explained that 5 years earlier, she had discovered she was pregnant. She had wanted desperately to tell him. She had imagined the look on his face when she placed his hand over her stomach. She imagined him laughing, crying, and promising that their child would never grow up surrounded by the darkness of his world. But before she could tell him, she learned that Adrian's enemies were planning to use her against him. Rebecca had been approached by a woman named Margaret who claimed to have evidence that the rival organization intended to kill Adrian and everyone close to him. Margaret told Rebecca that if she disappeared, Adrian might survive. She convinced Rebecca that Adrian's enemies were watching every move she made. So Rebecca made the most painful decision of her life. She left, not because she stopped loving Adrian, because she loved him enough to make him believe she had. Rebecca wrote that she had moved to a small town in Wisconsin and raised their son alone. She named him Noah. She told Adrian that Noah had Adrian's eyes, Adrian's stubbornness, and, strangely enough, Adrian's habit of tapping his fingers against a table whenever he was thinking. Adrian stopped reading. His entire world seemed to become silent. He had a son, a child who had spent 5 years growing up without him, a child who had never heard his father say his name. Adrian continued reading with tears gathering in his eyes. Rebecca explained that she had intended to return when the danger disappeared, but things became complicated. She had developed a serious illness shortly after Noah's 4th birthday. She had spent the last year fighting to stay alive long enough to make sure her son would be safe. Then came the sentence that shattered Adrian completely. Rebecca wrote that she was afraid she might not have much time left. She begged Adrian not to punish himself. She begged him not to blame Noah. And most importantly, she asked him to become the father she always knew he could be. At the bottom of the letter was an address. Adrian didn't sleep that night. Before sunrise, he left Chicago with only one trusted driver and a small photograph of Rebecca tucked inside his coat. For the first time in years, he wasn't traveling to threaten someone, collect money, or settle a score. He was traveling to meet his son. When Adrian arrived at the small Wisconsin town, he found a modest white house surrounded by bare trees. A bicycle rested near the porch. There were children's drawings taped inside the front window. Adrian stood outside for nearly 10 minutes. The most powerful man in the city was suddenly terrified of knocking on a simple wooden door. Finally, he raised his hand. The door opened. A little boy stood there holding a toy airplane. He was 5 years old. He had dark hair and the same serious eyes Adrian had seen every morning in his own mirror. The boy stared at him with curiosity. Adrian couldn't speak. For the first time in his adult life, he had no words. A woman named Margaret appeared behind the boy. She was older now, tired, and carrying the weight of 5 years of secrets. She recognized Adrian immediately and began crying. She explained that Rebecca had died 3 weeks earlier. Adrian felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Rebecca was gone. He had arrived too late. But then Noah looked up at him and asked whether he was the man from the picture beside his mother's bed. Adrian nodded through his tears. Noah studied his face for a moment and then quietly asked whether he was his father. Adrian dropped to his knees. He didn't care that his expensive coat touched the muddy porch. He didn't care that his driver was watching. He didn't care about his reputation. He simply opened his arms. Noah hesitated. Then the little boy stepped forward. Adrian held his son for the first time, and something inside him broke. He cried the way a man cries when 5 years of regret finally find a way out. From that day forward, Adrian began changing his life. He didn't abandon Noah. He didn't simply send money and disappear. He stayed. He learned how to pack school lunches, how to tie shoelaces, how to sit through boring school plays, and how to listen when a 5-year-old talked endlessly about airplanes. He also began dismantling the criminal empire that had once defined him. It wasn't easy. Enemies saw weakness. Former allies accused him of betrayal. Some tried to pull him back into the life he had spent years building. But Adrian finally understood something Rebecca had known all along. Power wasn't being feared. Power was having something worth protecting without destroying everything around it. He sold businesses connected to his criminal operations and invested the money into legitimate companies and community programs. He funded libraries, children's hospitals, and scholarships for families who couldn't afford education. Years later, Noah asked Adrian why he had changed. Adrian looked at his son and remembered the letter that had arrived 5 years too late. He told him that sometimes a person doesn't understand what truly matters until life takes almost everything away. Noah didn't fully understand, but he smiled and reached for his father's hand. And Adrian realized that Rebecca had given him one final gift. Not a letter. Not an explanation. A second chance. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to believe that people can change, and subscribe for more stories about love, forgiveness, and second chances. And before the story ends, comment, "Everyone deserves a second chance," if you believe that one act of love can change the direction of an entire life. 5 years late, Rebecca's letter had arrived when she was no longer there to see what it would do. But perhaps that was the point. Her final words had reached Adrian at exactly the moment he needed them most. The feared mafia boss who once believed love was weakness finally understood the truth Rebecca had always known. Love doesn't make a person weak. Sometimes, love is the only thing powerful enough to make a broken man choose to become human again. And every evening, when Adrian watched Noah fall asleep, he kept Rebecca's letter inside the drawer beside his bed. The paper had become fragile with age, but the words remained. 5 years late, and still right on time.